Hello everyone, Angel here, and I'm here with my review of Star Trek Bridge Commander, finishing off our trifecta of the three best known flight sim games of Star Trek: Starfleet Academy, Klingon Academy, and then Bridge Commander. It's been quite a journey. It's taken me, what, a year to get through all three games at least? I can't even remember now. Yeah, I don't do these very quickly. It is true, but you know, time is limited. But here we are. We finally got through Bridge Commander. Took about 20 odd episodes, and yeah, what do I think? Well, it's okay. It's if you're not into Star Trek, you'd probably find this tepid at best. The story is for Trek geeks. It has plot holes, but we'll get to that. The combat is fairly boring, in my opinion, but it can still be satisfying for Trek fans, particularly in, you know, getting your favourite ships to fight each other. Mods make this a much better game, particularly the remastered mod. At least that was my favourite one, but again, we'll get into that. But yeah, overall, it's okay. Klingon Academy is a far superior game to this, in my opinion. I'm sure I might get some dissenters on my opinion here, because I know Bridge Commander is the most popular game of this series. It's still played today. There are still loads of mods, people making ships for it, and they're really enjoying it, and that's fine. No judgment. Great. This doesn't do it for me as well, except when I was playing the remaster mod, then it was a lot more fun. But as I said, we'll get to that. Klingon Academy was better. I'd say Starfleet Academy also I enjoyed more, but I think that was helped by all the sort of FMV cutscenes and just sort of adding to the atmosphere more. So yeah, those are my overall thoughts, but let's get into the details a bit more. Bridge Commander was released in March 2002 by Activision, and this was made by Totally Games, and if that sounds familiar to you, then it should be if you're a viewer of my channel, because Totally Games makes TIE Fighter, X-Wing Alliance, X-Wing vs TIE Fighter, and all those lovely games. So yeah, this should be kind of close to my heart, really. They did not use the same engine, to my knowledge, as they did with the X-Wing Alliance series, X-Wing series in general. So this was a different engine. When I dived into this a little bit more, it said basically that Totally Games licensed the Net Immerse 3 engine, which I'd never heard of before, but they had considered it. Larry Holland, who's the founder of Totally Games at the time, said that he considered several options, including using updating the X-Wing Alliance engine, or licensing an engine from another developer, or even just building its own engine from the ground up. But in the end, it just decided to license someone else's engine. But unfortunately, kind of like most of the other games I've reviewed at this point, there is no information really about its development. I did try doing a little bit of digging, but yeah, there's nothing really here. There's maybe a few old news articles reviewing the game, but there's nothing, you know, it's still kind of before that time where game development was a bit better documented, or you know, get more backstory as to what happened. About the only bit of trivia I could find was that the employees for Totally Games spent about 6 months on research, design and testing to try and keep the game within the bounds of the Star Trek universe. And then at E3 2001, there was a multiplayer mode originally to be included, was dropped in favour of single player, and then that was reversed several days later, presumably through backlash or some other reason. I think it was the case, though, that when the game first shipped, the combat itself, you couldn't actually do manual control of combat. You just basically had to order Felix, your weapons guy, to do the firing for you, and then I think in a subsequent patch they basically added that in. But I couldn't find anything to verify that, so I could be wrong there, but I believe that's what may have happened. Which is interesting, because I wonder what led to that decision. Was it backlash? Because I feel that there would have been a lot of backlash to this. I mean, I should remember, but I don't, unfortunately. But I feel that if I was at the time like I was, and this game came out without that kind of combat, I would think I would probably be a bit annoyed, because I wanted to fly like Klingon Academy or something. So yeah, maybe they just wanted to approach it a different way, but we'll come to that in a bit more detail, I think, when we get to the gameplay itself. So let's start with story, as usual. Bland, boring, by the numbers. I mean, there's a couple of good moments here and there. I liked having Data on board when we had him on board. Having Picard there just kind of seemed to be there for the sake of having his name attached to the game more. He is the one that basically tutorializes you on the game and how to, you know, fly the ship and use the systems, but it's done in such an awkward way. It should have been a holodeck simulation, but instead we just get Picard charging onto our ship and taking command and issuing orders and telling us what to do. And from an in-game kind of narrative lore perspective, that doesn't make any sense, and it kind of takes me out of the immersion that I'm the captain of my ship here. It should have been a holodeck scenario where you're basically given some command training. That would have been a much better way to have approached that. But you could argue that's just a gameplay thing, but no, this is a gameplay and story thing. This is one of those cases where those two mesh together quite well. You have a narrative reason to be doing this training rather than just kind of, we'll just force it onto the player. Here's how you do this, blah, 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 blah. I think that could have been done better. But anyway, the basic plot is that a star goes, I can't remember if it's supernova or just basically explodes in a bad way, but it's still kind of there. Wipes out a colony or does a lot of damage, and so we're basically captain of a USS of the USS Dauntless, a Galaxy class starship. A brand new captain because the old captain he died, I think. And we start investigating this. There's a little bit of Klingon and Romulan smack talk. You try and keep the peace, and then the Cardassians start coming involved. You find a freighter carrying some weapons, I think, or something, and there's ships going missing, trying to find out what's going on. And eventually it turns out that this rogue Cardassian faction, which is now a house, there's a House of Matan, has basically decided to go to war with the Federation, along with some help from an unknown alien species called the Keswick. And in the long run, I think Matan's goal was to basically just get these sun-destroying devices, because that would provide a pretty nice advantage if you can use them, at least in the short term. But it's a pretty by-the-numbers thing, and connecting the dots from A to B to C to make the plot work, it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. For example, the Klingons and the Romulans. Klingons I can kind of buy more that they would be in the area, maybe, but I'm not so sure about the Romulans. They just seem to me that the Romulans are there for no reason other than to be there, and they're very antagonistic and very kind of rude to you, and it's just clearly there to create a conflict. It felt like a forced way to create conflict, so you could go about shooting things, which, you know, that's the main aim of the game, to go around shooting things, but it doesn't really make much sense. And then the Romulans do get involved later in the plot, but the only reason we get them involved is so, you know, we maybe just have a bit of choice and variety in the ships we're seeing and fighting with or against us. But they don't necessarily add anything to the plot, except to be mostly annoying. So, yeah. And the Klingons are largely the same, pretty much. Overall, though, the Cardassians are the main enemy in this game. You will be fighting a lot of Galors and Keldons, and then a bit later on, towards the end, you'll be fighting a couple of hybrids, which are pretty nasty to fight. But that's primarily what you're going to be fighting. And the last faction is the Keswick, as I've already said. They're basically, I think it was a silicon-based life form who are very kind of, you know, they don't want to really get involved with anything, but Cardassians made first contact with them, or Matan did, and basically said, the Federation are gonna do very bad things to you, so work with us, and we'll defend you. But he was clearly after their technology, and they believed him, and they gave Matan the tech and resources to build ships so that he could go to war with the Federation for some reason. And this, for me, is where the plot kind of completely falls apart, is Matan. He is an extremely one-dimensional, mustache-twirling villain. There is no depth to him. He is just there because I'm so evil. I'm going to rule the galaxy. Kind of, that's the kind of impression I get of this guy. But his whole plan sucks. First off, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be wrong here and there. It's true. It's first mentioned that this is a house of Matan. This is my first nitpick that I think I picked up in the game, is like, house? I don't remember the Cardassians basing themselves by family house names like the Klingons do, like, you know, House of Martok, for example. I don't recall the Cardassians working that way. So fine, okay, but let's just say they're a faction led by Matan. Now, I believe the timeline for this is set approximately 3 to 5 years after the conclusion of the Dominion War. Now, let me remind you, that was a multi-quadrant war between 6 major powers, which left the Cardassians completely ruined because Cardassia was basically leveled by the Dominion. Now, a lot of their fleet did remain intact, that's true, but as far as an empire goes, the Cardassian Union functionally ceased to exist basically at the end of Deep Space Nine, as far as I'm concerned, compared to, based on what they suffered from that. Now, that would be ripe for power vacuum struggles. You could get warlords breaking, the Cardassian mentality may be, out for revenge, or there's all sorts you can do with there. So I can buy that you get people out there who have influence and power, and rather than trying to rebuild in a better way, instead go back to being a warlord for their own self-interest or power or whatever. So this is clearly where Matan falls into as a category. But let me take you back to that moment where I said, the multi-quadrant war that lasted a couple of years and involved, I think, tens of thousands of ships at that point. Everyone got battered badly. No one came out of that well, necessarily, but most likely the Federation came out the strongest power from that engagement. They had completely militarized Starfleets. Their technology, once the Federation gets going, they tend to be on top of things. The Klingons had been devastated by the war as well. The Romulans won't be in much better shape. And if the combined power of the Dominion, the Cardassians and the Breen could not break that alliance, what makes me think that a faction of the Cardassian military can take on the entire, now heavily militarized, Federation fleet? That was my big problem here. Now the game goes to some degree of explanation that the Kessek are more technically advanced, and so yes, when we do eventually fight the Cardassian Kessek hybrids, they are very nasty. And it's also said that the Kessek are building ships for them as well, so they have some level of industrialization to build and maintain a fleet. But you still need to crew that fleet. At no point in the game is it implied that they're running on automatic or any kind of, drone ships, as it were. You have to have troops on these ships, officers. These ships are not small, so presumably they'll have hundreds per ship. We fight and destroy dozens of ships, so presumably we've killed tens of thousands of Cardassians in this little war. And let's be generous, let's say that maybe he has a few hundred ships at most. That's still not going to do much for you. Okay, maybe you can invade Federation space and you can maybe grab a foothold somewhere, but then what? Eventually the Federation's just going to come and just stomp on you, and that's it. You're defeated. So this doesn't make me think that Matan is particularly smart in any way, because what's his endgame here? What was he hoping to achieve in the end of the day? That would have just been basically undone. And that's not even saying to the fact that the Klingons and the Romulans would probably get involved in this. They suffered badly at the hands of the Cardassians. I think they would be pretty happy to give them another stomping if that's what they wanted. I just don't see any way, even with the help of the Kessel, that Matan would win any large-scale conflict with the Federation. So, yeah, don't buy it. But this could have been fixed. This could have been done in a way that did work. And I think the focus here should have instead been on the actual Cardassian Empire itself, or whatever the Cardassian government is at this point. So you could have that, the current government is Federation friendly. The Federation is helping them to rebuild, get their system of government back online, economy, all that stuff. A vassal state of the Federation, and the other conquering powers. I don't know at what point the Klingons or the Romulans would have any say in the occupation of Cardassia, but I would like to think that the Federation, being in a better military position, would say, look, we'll take care of this, alright? So yeah, it would be in the Federation's interest to keep this government in power. You could argue the non-interference thing is a bit of a fine line here, but I think at this point it would be like, okay, come on, Starfleet's been through enough at this point. They're not going to risk another major conflict if they can help it. But anyway, so Matan wants to get power, and what he should have done first, in my opinion, is to conquer the Cardassian Empire first. Take control, lead a coup, whatever it takes to basically get the control of the entire Cardassian infrastructure and military and personnel and all that stuff. Then you could have had an alliance with the Kessel to improve the tech of your ships and improve the industrial capacity of your shipbuilding. And then if you kept that quiet for a few months while you upgrade your fleet, the Kessel could be on the other side of Cardassian space, well outside the eyes of the Federation. And then you could come back and do some serious damage. Still not convinced you'd win, but it's a lot more plausible. I think that something would happen. Yeah. You could have then made Matan a bit more of an interesting character. Someone who's suffered greatly during the Dominion conflict itself and has taken his revenge to a whole new level. I don't know, something could have been interestingly done with his character instead of just being a one-dimensional moustache-twirling villain. I don't know, that's just my thoughts on the matter. And I realise now I've just been basically rambling about this plot hole, rather than the game itself perhaps. So let's move on a little bit, shall we? Let's talk about the crew. So I've already mentioned Safi, our first officer, I think, and she is insufferable. Not as bad. In fact, I'll walk it back a little bit. She is not as bad as some people kind of hinted at this should be. I do remember her being annoying, but you see a lot of the comments and Safi's very eager willingness to take command of your ship if you screw up even a little bit, or just basically barge in and say what's going on and how to do things. It's not as bad as that, I think. I think in the first sort of third or so of the game, it's a bit more annoying. But then later on, it's a little bit more hands-off, and you're just allowed to go ahead and do your thing. She might annoy you now and then, but it's not that bad. It's more the earlier stages of the game, and that's of course what will tend to leave more of an impression on people, particularly if you don't end up finishing the game. Anyway, we've also got Felix, our weapons guy, who looks very much like The Rock. That did get a few comments of why is The Rock on our ship. He's fine, just fine. There's nothing more to say about him. I didn't have any issue with him one way or the other. He was just fine. Then we have the helmswoman, which was Kiska Loma, I believe. This was played by the same lady who played Miral Paris, or Miral Torres Paris. I don't know what the full name was, but basically Tom Paris and Belana Torres' daughter. So she appeared in Endgame, I believe, in the future, helping Admiral Janeway. Terrible episode. Okay, it had its moments, but not my favourite episode of Voyager. But yeah, she was fine. Again, nothing to write home about, no complaints really, just there. We had Chief Brex, who was the Bolian engineer, and I think he had the most distinct performance outside of Safi. He infuses his performance with that kind of Bolian nervousness, and I appreciate that. But otherwise didn't stand up beyond that, other than he was the one who tended to make wisecrack quips from time to time. And I forgot to say about Safi's actress, Martha Hackett, is a well-known Trek actress. She played most notably Seska on Voyager. She was a Cardassian posing as a Bajoran on the Voyager crew, and then she eventually manages to get discovered and goes to the Kazon, and then that whole plot line just falls apart. Seska would have been a lot cooler if they kept her around a bit more often. But she's also played a Romulan on DS9. When the Defiant first arrives, she's basically monitoring the cloaking device, so she turns up for a couple of episodes there. I think she's been in one or two others, and yeah, she gets around basically, and she has the most convincing performance of the lot, I would say. But the least convincing of the lot is Miguel Diaz, played by Jonathan Del Arco, and that name should be familiar to some of you. That's the same guy who plays Hugh, the Borg Hugh in iBorg, and spoilers for Star Trek Picard Season 1, he's unceremoniously killed in a terrible way. So yeah, there you go. But his performance in this one is so bored. He just sounds bored with every line reading. I don't know if that's because he's supposed to be a particular species and it's just he's trying to play it that way, but he's just got this kind of annoyed, bored line reading. Should I make another sensor sweep? It's just, there's nothing there, and it kind of annoyed me. It took me out of the performance, the emotion of the bridge itself. So yeah, he did not do well. I'm sorry. We have a few others dotted around, but I'd say the only one, actually three other voices that I kind of recognised, or did recognise. So we had Max Grodenchik as Damon Prague. So he's a Ferengi character we encounter, and I think he might have been the Kessock character as well, that we do eventually have contact with. You've got Vaughn Armstrong, who's a very well-known Trek alumni. He's one of my favourite guest characters on Star Trek. He's probably best known as Admiral Forrest in Enterprise, but he's played quite a few Klingon characters over the years, and he's a Klingon character in this game, so there you go. And the final name that I did recognise, or at least the voice I recognised, was J. Paul Boehmer. He was in Klingon Academy as the usurper Melkor, that's it. And again, he's been in Star Trek a few times as a good guest actor. Do like him. I've already mentioned, obviously, we have Data and Picard, so Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner reprising their roles. I'd say Patrick Stewart's performance was a lot more sounding like he was reading lines. I don't feel that all his effort was into this one, unlike, say, a Final Unity. It just felt more like he was reading the script a bit more. But that's just me. As for Brent Spiner, I think he actually put more effort into sounding like Data. I mean, you know, it just felt like that was more data that I was listening to. So he did a good job, and that's why I think I kind of enjoyed having him on the ship when he was there on the ship for a couple of missions there, which was nice. So that covers the actual characters themselves. Now, the crew do attempt to have banter back and forth as you go through the missions. Quite a lot of it falls fairly flat for me. I never really feel that the crew come together in any kind of charismatic way. I think towards the end of the game it does start to be a bit better. It feels like the crew is kind of bouncing off each other a bit better. It should make sense that if you're a new crew with a new captain, that it takes time to mesh and get together. That awkwardness is fine. But I didn't get that kind of performance out of this. It was just more, I think everything was just a bit awkward, and the writing isn't all that good, in my opinion. But there were moments where it kind of amused me how almost racist this crew was. I think it was one of the earlier missions where basically almost everyone was trashing the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Cardassians for their, trust them to go running off like this. They're typical Klingon. And Safi's like, stop it. We can do that later. It's just like, hang on, aren't we supposed to be nice and peaceful and tolerant? But, to be fair, we did just come out of a major multi-quadrant war, so there you go. But now that I've spent, 10-15 minutes rambling about the story and the characters, I'm going to now segue into the title of the game itself, Bridge Commander, and what this game is trying to be. So we're going to go into gameplay now, I guess. But I think it was important to address the story first, because unlike Starfleet and Klingon Academy, this game seems to want to be placing more emphasis on you doing the commanding and less of the actual footwork yourself. This comes back to whether, when they patched in the ability to manually fly the ship and fire. As I said, I couldn't verify that, but that would make sense if that was their original vision, that they wanted you to be in command and you make the orders and then you just watch and see those orders carried out. That's what I think they were going for. And if that's what they were going for, they kind of failed. And I say kind of because, yeah, you can do that. You can order the ship to do things and off you go. But it's pretty shallow. I mean, coming off the back of Klingon Academy, which had super in-depth screens with all sorts of settings that you could have to change the power distribution of your various systems and ships, boarding parties. There was so much there. It was overwhelming. It could have used a lot better tutorialization, but it was there, and it made a difference. It made a huge difference to how you could fight and play in the game. You could fight superior forces if you were smart about it. Here, it's not that. You have, for example, the engineering section, you have 4 systems. You have shields, engines, weapons, and sensors. Basically, all I really needed to do was set everything except sensors to 125%, set the sensors a bit lower, and then basically almost every battle I could fly around before I run out of power and beat whatever I need to beat. And that was it. I mean, damage handling, it's just basically you have 3 systems that you can prioritize as being repaired, and then everything else is in a queue, and that's it. It's nice and simplified, and that's fine, but if your aim is to make a game where you are commanding your ship, I want there to be more to do in terms of the actual commanding of the ship. Now, part of that for me is obviously actually flying and firing myself, but it should also be, yes, you can delegate and ask the AI to do things, but I want the ability to have all that extra stuff and all the extra abilities to transfer power or set your systems and whatnot that Klingon Academy and Starfleet Academy also had. So this, to me, feels like quite a dumbing down of what came before. This is also not helped by the fact that, as I've already kind of complained about, you're not really doing much of the actual commanding. When it comes to the narrative side of things, Safi takes over and does all the talking for you. She makes the decisions, she gives the orders. So that is also taking not just the gameplay element and simplifying it and making it not so good, but you're also taking the narrative part of it away as well. So both Klingon and Starfleet Academy had diplomatic choices, or choices you could make during a mission, which affected the outcome of the mission. And in more Starfleet Academy's case, could affect the outcome of the endgame as well. So which choice you made. You don't get that really with Bridge Commander. You get some narrative choices, yes. There's only one that really seems to matter. But you don't get a dialogue pop up and say, oh, I want to make this decision. This is what I'm going to say. Starfleet Academy did this really well by comparison. There were plenty of missions where we didn't have to shoot things. We had to do basically a dialogue boss to figure out a way to resolve the situation, or use our science equipment or whatever. aside from one mission where we're basically scanning some asteroid elements or scanning for something, this is absent from this game. I don't get to command or make decisions on a situation other than what am I going to shoot at, what subsystem do I want you to shoot at, and what power systems do I want you to go. Oh, and set this course, hail this, or scan this. That's basically all I can do. And I'd rather just fly the ship and do it myself. It's simple enough that I don't need to worry about the AI handling this, unlike Klingon Academy, which is a complete other end, and I would have appreciated a bit more tutorialization and AI help there. It's the two extremes of each other. It would have been nice if they basically had a sort of more of a middle ground where we had some of that complexity of Klingon Academy, but simplified a bit more so more players can get to grips with it better. That's what I think it kind of really needed, a streamlining of Klingon Academy's systems, but without dumbing it down so much. And visually, it doesn't help also that you can't really walk around your bridge, you can't go to the stations, and the character models look atrocious. They're terrible, but, you know, I'll cover that later. That's when we get to the graphics. We're not there at the graphics yet, because we still need to talk about the actual combat. What is the combat like? The combat is... it's kind of boring, to be honest. It's most entertaining when there's multiple ships involved, both visually and just from a more gameplay perspective. It actually feels like, okay, I've got something to do now. It's more of a challenge. But one-on-one combat is really boring most of the time. It's just rotate your arc of whichever phaser you need to get going. Keep your strongest shields arced towards your enemy if you're under heavy fire. Yeah, it's slow. It doesn't feel kinetic. There is no aiming at all when it comes to beam weapons. You just lock and it fires. Torpedoes have a very weird floaty kind of aim system. You get these brackets which kind of show you when you have a lock. But from what I've actually understood the nuances of how the torpedo system works, if you operate on single fire, I think it will home in straight away, and then after, I think it was like a few seconds, it would lose its homing. So you basically had to use it at a closer range, whereas if you use the spread, like 4 torpedoes at once, it fires its spread, it delays a few seconds, and then it starts homing. So it's better for as a long range weapon. And I didn't really know that till sort of towards the end of my playthrough. So yeah, it's a little weird, but also when enemy torpedoes are being fired at you, particularly the Kessock ones, there's just this very, very strange floatiness to them. They're just kind of floating over towards you, and no matter what kind of evasive maneuver you do, it doesn't seem like you can do much about it. The only exception here is disruptors, or cannons. They are the only things that seem to just be straight line aim and shoot. You can avoid them fairly easily. But they also seem to, I think, do the most damage through shields as well, from what I've observed. And yeah, it's lacking punch. It's lacking that kinetic, visceral edge to it that Klingon Academy really has. Another thing that kind of doesn't help sell this is the terrible damage modeling. One of the best features of Klingon Academy was the ship destruction mechanics. The way bits of ship broke apart, and you could lack a nacelle or bits of your saucer section or whatever. It was really good, even for the time it's in. And Bridge Commander seems like or it feels like a bit of a come down from that. The damage modeling is much more basic. You just, a giant hole will just suddenly appear in the saucer section, and it doesn't make any sense. I even had one point where I think it was a Cardassian ship, most of the mesh just disappeared. There was just tiny bits of mesh flying about, and I couldn't target it anymore. My weapons just went straight through it, so it became invincible. Luckily, I only encountered that bug the once, I think, as far as being invincible anyway. But yeah, I mean, some of the ships do have certain weaknesses. So I think Cardassian ships, for example, you hit them from above or below, that's where their shields are weakest. Tractor beam in this game is reasonably useful. It uses up a lot of power, but you can use it to basically slow down an enemy and sort of control your maneuvering around them to avoid them sort of getting their firing arc against you. It's fairly easy to kind of game the AI if you want to. And thankfully the AI is nowhere near as RAM happy as it is in Klingon Academy or Starfleet Academy, and yet I still kind of enjoy that behaviour a bit more, because at least that's something I had to react to, and it gave you the tools to react to it. Remember, you had emergency turn, emergency reverse, emergency stop. We had those tools there to deal with ramming, which, you know, it's more to do with the AI, and then probably that's just a mitigating factor, but it kind of worked. It made it more fun. But going back to the firing arcs and rotating around, I like the concept in principle. However, once you do run out of energy, there's a very long period of time, although it feels like, before it recharges again before you can fire. So if you're not moving about, there's going to be a point where you're just not firing anymore. And I don't like that all that much. I get the principle behind it, but the phases don't feel like they have a lot of power to them. I don't get a lot of feedback as to how powerful the phaser is, particularly as it's a sustained beam you're firing. But you contrast that to Klingon Academy's combat. Yes, every weapon has a timer, but there was still a continuous application of firepower going on there. And it was punchy, and things happened, and it felt more visceral. Also, while we're on the subject of weapons fire, you can only target one ship at a time. You cannot multi-target. Klingon Academy and Starfleet Academy both have this ability. The AI will fire your other arcing weapons. If you're facing forward, the AI will shoot for you your side and rear weapons. You don't get that in this game. So to me, it just feels like yet another dumbing down. And for me, it's just another aspect which makes the game feel nowhere near as visceral, kinetic as Klingon Academy. What else am I going to complain about that I compare to Klingon Academy? In-system warp. So this game, okay, you warp to a new system. You have a loading screen, which is basically just a warp field. Klingon Academy didn't have that when you load a new system. You actually had an actual loading screen. But here's when it then flips. Klingon Academy renders the full system. You can visit any planetary body or object in the system you like, and there's an in-system warp you can do. But for Bridge Commander, it doesn't have that. You just click button, click warp, off you goes, it does a cutscene, and there you go, you're there. Why? I kind of miss that kind of... Again, it's taking away immersiveness, or just that warping to that part of the system. Klingon Academy didn't spend much time doing it. You could spend at most maybe a minute in warp if it's a really long way away, but it adds to the immersion, and I like it. And it also seems that you do have the ability to warp in system. You've just taken it away as a cutscene instead. So I'm not sure what was going on there as a decision, or maybe it was just that the engine couldn't do it as Klingon Academy could. Combat balance. I think the combat balance is fairly poor. Not too bad in some cases, but things, for example, Romulan warbirds, they don't really feel very deadly or imposing. Aside from their size, they're very tepid in terms of actual combat. The 5 Starfleet ships that we have access to, there's only 5. There's very few actual ships in the game, and that's possibly more down to just resources and how many ships, because the ships themselves are actually pretty well done in terms of models, detailing, and all that sort of stuff. So that could have just been a resource time issue. But the ships themselves, they don't feel distinct. So let's take the 5 Federation ships. We have the Ambassador class, the Akira class, the Galaxy, the Sovereign, and the Nebula. Of these 5 ships, we only fly 2. We fly the Galaxy for 2 episodes, and then 6 more episodes. The remaining part of the game we're basically in the Sovereign. That's another complaint I have. Ship progression. We only fly 2 ships. Klingon Academy had us fly, 15 different types of Klingon ship at some point, and it was feeling like a pretty decent progression path to go through all those ships as well. But we only have the 2 here. The Galaxy, which is generally inferior in combat, and then you get the Sovereign for the rest of the entire game, and that's what you're fighting with. But there's no real distinction between the 2, other than the fact that the Sovereign is basically just tankier, faster, and has more power. In terms of its weapons armament, it's identical. It has the same kind of arrays around it, same number of torpedoes. The only thing going for it is that it has quantum torpedoes instead of photon torpedoes, which basically just do double the damage of photons. Again, if you fly the Akira class or the Nebula class, the Akira class is basically a Sovereign just with weaker shields and a bit faster, but it's same armament with quantums. And the Nebula is just basically a weaker Galaxy class. The Ambassador class is the only one that is distinctly different in how it behaves, because it's really weak anyway, but its phaser strips and how it's armed is a lot lighter and quicker. And that was nice. That was quite what I was kind of looking for in terms of more distinction between how ships behave and what role they occupy. So yeah, that's disappointing. And then there's Starbase 12. This is your base of operations for the entire single-player campaign. You will come back here to repair and rearm and get your mission briefing pretty much every main episode. And this is fine. This is basically how the game lets you rearm and repair. However, you're basically encouraged to do this every battle, after every single engagement, because the game doesn't stop you. For the most part, you can go to Starbase 12 whenever you like, get rearmed, get repaired, get your energy back to full, then go back to where you were and resume what you were doing. This is fine, I guess, for making the game easier and less frustrating, particularly if you've just had a rough fight, but it really does interrupt the pace and flow of the game. I think there should be better ways to break that up, or if you are jumping to a new system or doing something else, give the ship time to repair and rearm, or do something around that. It's kind of worse because there's basically an unskippable cutscene every time you dock to rearm. You have to watch the ship go into the starbase, you see the guy goes, bringing her in again, eh? And then you come back out again. And that all takes, what, 15 seconds? It's 15 seconds where you can't do anything, you can't skip it. And it's made a lot worse if you have allied ships. You can command allied ships to go dock and get repaired. And the bigger the ship, the slower it seems to be. So you can waste well over a minute getting everyone rearmed and repaired to go back out again. It could have been done better. Another complaint I have is that the starbase, despite being colossally huge, I really do love the space dock design. They're so pathetically armed. How is this thing just unable to defend itself? It's ridiculous. So that pretty much covers my gameplay critique, I think, for now. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting something, and I know this sounds all terribly negative, and yeah, it kind of is. But this is just how I feel about the game, and I'm sorry I'm going to keep being negative here, but audio. We're going to go into do some audio stuff now. The audio here is a very mixed bag. Let's start with the music. The music is extremely bland and repetitive. There's not many tracks. It varies a bit more towards the end of the campaign, gets a little bit more... I'm hesitant to use the term upbeat, but that's the best way I can describe it, but it's still really bland and boring. It's very emblematic of the music of that era, so if you're an avid Trek fan, you may have noticed sort of the first few seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation had really good soundtracks, really good music, distinctive tracks. Do you remember like the Borg theme, the Romulan theme? There's some really good stuff there, and a lot of that is attributed to a composer called Ron Jones. He was basically removed or kicked out. I can't remember if he was fired or they didn't hire him anymore. But at the very end of season 4, towards the end of season 4 of TNG, and that's when Dennis McCarthy and Jay Chataway generally took over Star Trek music for basically all the way to the end of Enterprise. And the directive from Rick Berman during this era was that the music should be just background wallpaper stuff. It shouldn't take anything away, and that is the dumbest thing you can say. Music is such an important thing to establish the flavour and tone of a scene. I just can't comprehend why you would make such a dumb decision. So that's why the music in Star Trek, in later Star Treks and Deep Space Nine and all of Voyager, is kind of bland. There's very few tracks that I can think of that era that actually stand out to me. Things like, you know, Sacrifice of Angels and DS9, or a couple of other tracks, they do have some memorable beats to them, but there's nothing really distinctive, and that's a real shame. And that's come through in this game, and that's a real shame. The music was also too loud at vanilla levels. I had to really crank the music volume down because it was really too imposing and too boring and too annoying, and it's a shame. It's a real shame. But what about the rest of the audio? It's a mixed bag. Some of the weapons fire sound is decent. The phaser sounds, some of the torpedo sounds, the bridge sounds. It's there. It's very Star Trek. It's good. Romulan Klingon torpedo sounds are terrible. It's this very high-pitched, awful, screechy kind of sound, and it's not very Star Trek at all. I don't know where they got this from, why they chose it, and why both ships use the same sound. No. Don't use it. It's horrible. The same as the crew chatter. I've already said how the crew are kind of bland and don't really mesh together very well. You have crew chatter in combat, and again, it's very bland. It gets old quick. But if you contrast that to Klingon Academy's battle audio, and I might do a comparison here. Well, I might pause the video here just so you can hear a comparison of the combat audio in Klingon Academy versus Starfleet Academy. In Klingon Academy, I really enjoy the crew chatter battle audio. It really helps to sell everything. The audio in Klingon Academy, for the most part, was superb in comparison to this game. But we'll do a comparison, I think, and we'll see what I'm trying to get at.
Forward shield is down 50%. Dorsal shield is down 50%. Enemy pressure. Forward shield is buckling.
sir, their aft shield is draining.
Shields are at 75%.
So hopefully you saw what I was trying to get at there. It's just for Bridge Commander, and Klingon Academy is like, yeah, that's the feeling I get from it with the audio design here. But other than that, most of the rest of the audio is just fine. It's okay. And that brings us to graphics. This is where probably I'm going to get the most positive about the game. The graphics, for the most part, the exterior stuff is really good for its time. The ships are quite well detailed. The lighting is pretty decent. Remember, this is a game that began development in 1999. So think of the games from that era. What was coming out at that time? This came out in 2002. Klingon Academy was 2000. So yeah, we're getting to a point where graphical fidelity is really starting to improve, and this is what kind of really saves the game in a way. That the exterior stuff, seeing the ships fight, looking at them. We love these ship designs, right? Half the fun is just watching these ships move and do their thing, and that's what really sells Bridge Commander for Trekkies, and what makes this, at best, average to mediocre game a lot more interesting to fly, especially when you add the mods on top of that. So yeah, visually, I mean, the Sovereign, the Galaxy class, they look great for the time that they came on. They even have the little phaser charge up effect. It's not the whole array, but it's just a small portion of the array. But I've always loved that little aspect of how phaser arrays work in Star Trek. So it's nice that they have that little feature in there. The bridge designs themselves are okay. They're not as good, I would say, but they're decent enough that they've got some nice detail. But where the game really falls over is the character modelling. They are terrible. They are the really, really bad character models. The face textures are basically, for certainly someone like Picard, they've basically just taken a picture of Patrick Stewart and basically plastered a texture of his face onto a very low polygon model. The chest, where you the body basically is extremely low poly and very, very low texturing on the uniforms. I'd be very interested to know why, of all the other things, the character models just had no effort, it seems, put into them. Is that a limitation? Did they not have enough time? That's all I can really think of. And the more I kind of think to myself and talk to myself about this game, it's like I feel that there was stuff that they wanted to do that they couldn't do, either because they didn't have the time, the resources, the money, or the tech. Because there is something here. There is the foundations of a game which could have been much better if it had gone a bit further with basically everything. So yeah, that's it. That's Bridge Commander for you. It's a shame. I haven't given it exactly a stellar review. I mean, this is still way better than DS9 Harbinger. That's not hard. That is the worst game I've played so far in my Let's Plays. But what really saves Bridge Commander from making it a tepid, average, boring game are mods. So I tried 3 mods. We tried the Kobayashi Maru mod, the remastered mod, and the legacy mod in that order. And this is what really helps bring this game into a more enjoyable category and increasing its longevity. So the Kobayashi Maru mod was the oldest one I tried. These are all basically ship packs or balance packs. What was most interesting about Kobayashi Maru is that it had this warfare mode, which was experimental, I would say, but it was kind of like this RTS mode where you could buy bases and ships and order those ships to go places and hold systems, and that was really cool. If that had worked properly, then that would have been really cool to sort of add in as an extra replayability factor to the game. But unfortunately, what this game suffers from is a bit of instability. So whilst the mods are great, it has limitations, and those limitations eventually crash the game. So basically, if you have a big enough combat scenario, enough ships, or just keep going for long enough, the game will eventually crash to the desktop. It doesn't matter which mod you're using, it happened with every single mod I tried, and that's unfortunate. And I wonder in a way if that's been one of the main limiting factors to why there's not more, because I understand that you can create single player campaigns with Bridge Commander, but I don't really see much in the way of that. It's mostly just let's fly the ships in quick battle mode. So yeah, that as an idea was great. The legacy mod was basically the vanilla game just improved visuals, some slight tweaking to the balance here and there, but it's basically still vanilla game, vanilla balance, and you can play the single player campaign with it, and it's just basically much prettier. And the ship models are gorgeous. The detailing on the Galaxy class, my favorite ship, is just le chef's kiss. And I think many of these models are also shared in the remastered mod, and the remastered mod is my favorite by far, because remastered not just improves the visuals, it completely changes the balance of the game. It makes the weapons fire faster firing, more visceral. The ships are much better balanced. A Romulan warbird, remember how I was complaining how a Romulan warbird didn't feel very powerful or imposing? This version of the warbird now, this is feeling like a deadly, dangerous, massive warship. And there was lots of cool things we could do, lots of cool bridges between all the mods. Actually, all the mods had different bridges, which are really well done. But the remastered one is really what did it for me. So you could think of it as in TIE Fighter Total Conversion, TFTC. We have TFTC Classic, we have TFTC Reimagined. Classic is the original game, as close as we could possibly make it to the original game, but just looking a lot more modern. So for me, that would be the Legacy mod for Bridge Commander. For TFTC Reimagined, where I've basically redone the campaign to varying degrees, and now redoing the balance, and there's more going on, and it's faster pace and all that. That's the remastered mod for Bridge Commander. That would be how I would compare this anyway. And so many ships are still being made by people. There's a great community of modders out there who continue to build ships that are, you know, from the modern day shows. And I think both remastered, I think remastered is the one that's primarily used, but I'm guessing probably Legacy is used as well, or Kobayashi Maru. I don't really know the details, but I imagine remastered is probably the most popular one at this point. But for me, remastered is basically the one which made it closer for me in terms of how it played towards Klingon Academy. It was a lot more fun. And there is a modified version of the single player campaign. I played a couple of the missions. I didn't go through the whole thing because it is still largely the same missions, but towards the end you'll get more ships flying with you, different types of ships, and it fleshes it out a bit more, makes it seem a bit more real. So yeah. And that, I think, wraps up my review of Bridge Commander. I have mostly ranted what I wanted to say. I'm probably sure I've forgotten some things that I wanted to cover, but all I do with these reviews is I make a bunch of notes and then I just go rambling and hope for the best. Looking forward to your comments on this. I'm sure there might be some people who disagree with my particular take, but I do recommend it if you are a Trek fan. You will enjoy this if you are a Trek fan. Even if the gameplay and the story isn't great itself, it's still a worthwhile Trek game to play, and absolutely worth it for the mods. The modding community, as I said, is great. They do some awesome work. Keep at it. My love to you people. So yeah, what next? Well, I have decided to give myself the challenge of doing Half-Life. Yes, the original Half-Life. We'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work out, well, I won't do any more Half-Life, will I? Don't know when that will start. Maybe soon, maybe not so soon, but it will start at some point. And until that time, my friends, thank you very much for joining me, and fly safe.